So the topic is indeed key, as Ambassador Mona also spoke about before, as the impact of climate change on conflicts, but not only, is one of the biggest challenges of our time. And in order for us to introduce this panel, I have the big pleasure to welcome Ambassador Julian Tony, who will be speaking from Geneva. He's the permanent representative of Switzerland to the Conference on Disarmament and also the deputy head of the permanent mission of Switzerland to the UN office and other international organizations in Geneva. So without further ado, I will give the floor to Ambassador Tony in Geneva. I don't know if he's connected. Yes. So please, Julien, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Director Isabella, and very good to be speaking to you directly from Geneva to Addis Ababa. Dear colleagues, Excellency, dear friends, it's a great pleasure to be with you, and an honor to welcome also you to the second Peace Dialogue on Climate, Peace and Security. On behalf of the Swiss Federal Department of Foreign Affairs, I warmly thank also our co-organizers, the Geneva Peacebuilding Platform and Amani Africa, for their collaboration in bringing us together today. This dialogue builds on the first edition held last October between Geneva and New York during Switzerland's presidency of the United Nations Security Council. Today, we are proud to continue this conversation and proud also to deepen the link between Geneva and Addis Ababa, two centers of global and regional diplomacy for peace and development. The connection between climate, environment, conflict and peace is not new, but its urgency is undeniable. In the past 2 years alone, we have witnessed record-breaking heat waves across continents, floods in South Sudan, prolonged drought in the Horn of Africa. In Switzerland, our landscapes are being also reshaped by glacier melt and period of drought. These events reflect a global pattern, one that science has long predicted, and citizens, especially the younger generation, are now urging us to address with greater alarm this challenge. Climate change is a human security issue. It fuels competition over land, water, and food. It exacerbates fragilities, amplifies social and political tensions, and disproportionately affects marginalized populations. In fragile settings, it can become a risk multiplier, contributing to displacement and instability, and in some cases, even conflict. In Geneva, we are working more and more to addressing this challenge. We bring together a unique ecosystem of expertise, from humanitarian response and peace building to development cooperation and climate science. By the way, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, is located 200 meters only from myself. But this expertise has far greater impact when it connects directly with regional leadership and with the lived realities of communities most affected. Therefore, the pertinence to link our work to Africa. Though the continent contributes the least to global greenhouse gas emissions, it faces some of the most severe impacts of climate change. From drought and floods to resource degradation, these environmental stresses have direct consequences for food security, livelihoods, and social stability. But it has also innovative solutions to share with other parts of the world. I think, for instance, of the cooperation around water on the basis of the river Senegal in Gambia, or on groundwater. Addressing the risk and seizing opportunities requires a cross-sectoral anticipatory approach, one that includes reducing emission, strengthening adaptation, and integrating conflict prevention into environmental and climate policies. Switzerland is fully committed to this agenda, both through multilateral diplomacy and through operational engagement on the ground. As a non-permanent member of the United Nations Security Council in 2023 and 2024, we made climate security one of our 4 priorities. Despite geopolitical tensions and hesitation from some states, we helped strengthen climate-related language in, first, the renewal of the UNMISS mandate in South Sudan, but also in presidential statements of the Security Council on West Africa, the Sahel, and Central Africa.
Thank you.
I'm back, I think.
Okay, yes, you're back.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
But action is just as important as policy. Switzerland supports a wide range of conflict-sensitive climate programs, particularly in fragile contexts across Africa, both bilaterally and through multilateral partners such as the UN agencies, multilateral development banks, or the climate funds. In South Sudan, for example, we support returnees and host communities to manage natural resources through nonviolent dialogue, linking short-term relief with long-term food security and social cohesion. We strongly welcome the leadership of the African Union in advancing this agenda. The development of a common African position on climate, peace, and security is a historic step. It is the first time a continent-wide effort seeks to define a comprehensive approach to the nexus. Switzerland is proud to support it. We also support a climate, peace, and security advisor at the UN Office to the African Union, who promotes a coordinated regional approach to climate-related risks. Strengthening the Geneva-Addis axis is more than symbolic. It allows us to bring together scientific knowledge, policy dialogue, and operational realities in ways that are inclusive, cooperative, and forward-looking. There is no single causal link between climate change and peace, but the pathways are real, complex, and growing. We cannot afford to ignore them. We must invest in understanding these dynamics and in building solutions that link climate resilience development and peace building. This dialogue is part of that effort. It is a step forward, and I thank you all for being part of it. I now look forward to the contribution of our panelists and to the rich discussion that we will have. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Tony, for introducing, indeed, in a very precise and focused way, our discussion. So now it's my real pleasure to welcome here in the discussion Your Excellency Parfait Onanga Anyanga. You are the SRG and also the representative of the UNOAU. And in order for us to discuss quite freely, exactly cut to the chase immediately. With asking you the question in your mind, what are the most urgent or pressing steps that the international community should take to support different African countries, but also the AU in building resilience to climate-induced security threats, especially in conflict-prone regions, and what is your organization doing in that regard?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Madam Moderator. And let me first thank and congratulate the government of Switzerland for convening us here today and for bringing the Geneva Dialogue to Addis Ababa, where Africa, actually, where the world meets Africa. And that's fantastic. I think it's you're setting a new trend that we will encourage others to also build on. My second point is really to congratulate Switzerland on its leadership on matters of peace and security on the nexus between climate change, peace and security. And they are bringing this conversation, as just outlined by Ambassador Julian, in the Security Council during your mandate, where to some, you could have seen as an encroachment, as this is not considered as a core, peace and security issue. But from an African perspective, I think it's beyond rhetoric. The realities that the continent is facing are dire. and needs urgent action. And the basis for the UN's engagement with the African Union on this specific matter builds on the absolutely strong and strategic partnership that the United Nations has with the African Union on the joint framework for peace and security. And this is all-encompassing. It considers peace and security through a holistic approach that does not prioritize only, let me put it this way, a military approach to security, but rather all dimensions that are affecting peace and security. And definitely today, for the Peace and Security Council of the African Union, there is no more, rhetoric about the issue. It is clear that the Council has established climate change, and I'm speaking under the supervision of a member state whose country has led the continent on these matters of peace, on climate change, peace and security. It has established that definitely climate change, if it's not properly managed, will be a multiplier, a risk multiplier on the continent, therefore needs to be given all the attention that it requires. So as far as the UN is concerned, I mean, I will simply emphasize the very strong partnership that we have with the African Union, the recognition that climate change pose a emerging and rapidly escalating threat to peace and security on the continent is something that we have definitely, we are working on. And thanks to Switzerland's support, we are now, through the UN security, climate security mechanism, where we now have in most peace operations climate advisors, which is an innovation, including in South Sudan, by the way, where colleagues are doing a tremendous work, adding into our tools into conflict prevention and early warning, and building the climate change dimension into our risk analysis. We do have also the work that we've been doing together with Switzerland in enabling the African Union to come up very quickly with its common position on climate change and on peace and security, which is unprecedented, which will create really a very virtuous precedent, bringing climate change at the global stage. And this is where you can appreciate the leadership role that Africa is playing on this very matter. And it's not simply because, Africa is a champion, wants to be a champion of peace and security. Climate change, if we don't do precisely what Ambassador Julian said, working on reducing emissions, as the SG said, there is only one way forward into addressing this scourge, is reducing emissions, carbon emissions, to ensure that we can manage, stay within the 1.5, even though all hope seems to indicate that we may go beyond that threshold of the 1.5. But if we can manage, managing the risk of global warming on and this impact on peace and security in Africa, then we'll be able to address peace and security concerns more squarely. My last point is really to commend also the work that we'll be doing together with Switzerland support in advancing at least ensuring that on the funding issue, there is, building on the on the COP, preparing Africa to be ready for COP30, but at least to ensure that all the work that was done through the new qualified, the collective quantified goal of climate change, that funding is secure through that angle, but also that we can support efforts to ensure that resources are not only mobilized on the loss and damage fund, but that access to those funds will be made more easily accessible to countries, so that we can close the gap between adaptation and responses to mitigation effort also on the continent. So again, this is simply to say that though this is a challenging field, very complex, where lacking resources will definitely make our work extremely difficult. It's only by coming together through the support of like-minded countries. Many of them are maybe in the room. I will not mention them, but simply to say that this is a cause that requires effective partnership to ensure that Africa can indeed quickly advance the completion of its common position to be ready for COP30, so that this will provide not only the continent, but the global community a tool to work on to ensure that we can manage indeed all the risks that affect peace and security in Africa when it comes through the climate change angle in a more effective manner. I will leave it there, but commendable job done, and thanks to your support.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for also for highlighting the need to find financing support. In the previous discussion with Mrs. Awadabo, there was also this observation that peacebuilding in general lacks the overall financing support that we would need, and it's really difficult to hear that there is a similar lack of support for this issue of climate and security issues. And indeed, also we were speaking in finding new partnerships, including perhaps toward the private sector and private actors. That could be also an interesting way to open the discussion. My next speaker on the list, who is based in Geneva, is Mrs. Faten Agad, who is a climate and diplomacy expert and who was also a former advisor at the AU Commission. So yes, I see you online here. It's a pleasure to see you here, Mrs. Agad. And so I'm also going to ask you quite two direct questions, if you allow me. So you were indeed a member of the high-level panel of experts who contributing to the drafting the report last year on Africa and the reform of the multilateral system, which is a joint Namibia and Amani Africa initiative. So perhaps could you share some insights from the report specifically on climate and security, which could be relevant for our discussion today? And also directly a second question to you, since I have you here. As we discussed, Africa and the AU are at the forefront of developing the climate security agenda, including through a common African position, which is very much welcome. So how can this inspire other actors, including in Geneva, to push ahead the agenda? Please, Faten, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much for having me and for organizing such an important meeting. I think the topic is extremely timely, and it's a pleasure for me to join you. I think it was raised earlier by the previous two speakers, but I think it's commonly agreed and accepted that climate change is a threat multiplier on the African continent. The climate exacerbates existing vulnerabilities across the continent. It raises risk. If one looks at potential for conflict, it raises tension in some communities, and I think the evidence collected in the last decade, because this is not a new issue, it's an issue that many experts within international institutions, among think tanks, researchers, that it's an issue that they have been looking at. And in the course of the last decade, I think we've accumulated enough evidence to assert that there is a link in the form of a threat multiplier between climate change and security. And I think as a result of that, we've seen a lot of laudable initiatives emerging. That includes the climate security mechanism of the UN. It includes the multiple discussions within the UN Security Council, and the leadership there of Switzerland was, as well as other partners, was rightly mentioned. I think there is an increasing interest and increasing commitment to integrating the climate risk in and normalizing it really in risk assessment, in early warning, in terms of data collection. So I'd say in that sense we've come a long way, and that's something that we've recognized, including in the report that you mentioned. However, I think the solution, and if I go back to the report that you just mentioned, which we prepared last year on the reforms of the multilateral system, what was evident is that the solution, if we want to move further, does not lie in the securitization of climate, despite the current, I would argue, geopolitical temptation to do that. We've had some time back a link between peace and security and migration, and I do feel we need to acknowledge that there is climate is a multiplier, but we need to avoid the temptation of securitizing the conversation of climate. The reason I'm saying that is that I think that the solution lies in action. And that action needs to take place within the sphere of delivering our commitments within the global framework on climate action. So yes, we do need to integrate and be as much aware as possible in terms of early warning, in terms of peace building, of climate. But what we especially need is action, and it's there what I wanted to zoom in. Action for us to reduce the risk in terms of conflict will need to come in the form of support to what's referred to as adaptation actions, and the SRSG just before me spoke of loss and damage. It's there where we need action. I just wanted there to highlight some figures. As we know, the African continent is the most affected by climate change, and yet we receive only 20% of global adaptation finance flows. That translates to 13 billion annually between 21 and this current year. According to the nationally determined contributions, which are for those who are not working specifically in the climate space, these are essentially the country plans, the country programs that outlines the commitments of a country internationally in terms of climate action. It's estimated that as a continent, we need 53 billion per annum between 2020 and 2035. That is 2.5% of Africa's GDP. If we are to effectively tackle adaptation, which is really essential to reduce that threat multiplying effect of climate on conflict. What we also know is, unfortunately, is that adaptation finances into Africa are not growing fast enough. In fact, the increase is extremely limited. It's only 14% compared to the 2020 levels. And unfortunately, at the last COP, we haven't seen a scale up in ambition in terms of adaptation action. A lot of this financing is currently limited primarily to multilateral institutions, which provide 63% of the financing, and 19% of the financing is provided by African countries. The remainder of that, 3%, comes from private sector, which this is not only an issue in Africa, it's a global issue. We've struggled systematically to get private sector to invest in adaptation action in loss and damage. And so for us to scale up, we will need more action from multilateral institutions, from the bilaterals and countries, provided that they can expand their resource mobilization in a responsible way that does not exacerbate and in fact lead to additional tensions within the countries. Now, that being said, I think the question is how do we move forward? What I wanted to highlight here is that we're speaking of peace and security, and we're speaking of climate. These are two global public goods that we need to think of as two interrelated issues that require, in fact, global action for us to continue to manage them. And so the first emphasis there that I would like to place is really applaud the efforts in terms of continuing to engage on these issues and position them and talk about them in a multilateral level. I think what we will also need to increasingly look into doing, and I think the UN agencies have started with that good practice, and some of the bilateral as well, but we need to scale that kind of across-sectoral coordination much more, is this notion of coherence between action that we take within the climate space and with what we want to achieve in terms of peace and security. And I think for us to do that, we need stronger coordination mechanism. And my last point here is that we need to, again, to avoid tension and conflict in all forms, and not just a large-scale armed conflict, but also political tensions, political instability, etc. We need to really place emphasis on a just climate transition. That is what will give a sense that there is action, and that action reaches the communities that are affected in a way that helps us mitigate the risk of climate, and for example, in local conflict within local communities, and give a sense also that countries do not need to go too far in terms of the climate action in a way that leads to further internal destabilization, and we do see the risk of that in some of the conversations. So how do we strike a balance in terms of a just climate transition that in the benefit of peace and security and of the peace and security agenda? Thank you very much. I'll stop here.
Thank you very much, Fatah, and also for reminding us that climate change and climate and the environment are public goods that require global action, but a global action that is also based on just climate transition. I think these were important reminders that you proposed to us again. Next on my list of speakers, also intervening from Geneva, is Dr. Abdi Fidar, who is the director of the IGAD Climate Prediction and Application Center, ICPAC. So yes, we see you online here. So welcome in Addis Ababa. Here again, I'm going to ask you quite straightforward questions, and perhaps you can develop in your intervention. So, from your point of view, what are the most pressing needs for regional organizations like IGAD to scale up their climate security work? And how can the international community better align its support with IGAD's regional priorities? And perhaps also ask you what opportunities exist for stronger collaboration between IGAD, the AU, and Geneva-based actors to improve early warning systems, resilience building, and conflict prevention related to climate risks. The floor is yours.
Thank you. I am joining you from Geneva, but from Nairobi. Our center is located in Nairobi. Actually, as IGAD Climate Prediction and Application Center, we're doing a lot when it comes to assessing climate security and also advising member states, IGAD member states, on how to address climate-induced conflicts. We have recently conducted a comprehensive assessment on the regional climate-associated insecurity, focusing on the existing policies and strategies and how those policies and regulations affect the region's security or insecurity. We focused on, again, on 3 member states, that is Ethiopia, Somalia, and Kenya. What we found is there are a number of such policies, starting from the national constitutions to the policies on specific sector-specific regulations and strategies. But what we again found is those policies and regulations rarely speak to one another. They are poorly coordinated, and sometimes they even contradict. If you look at the national constitutions, every constitution provides provisions that the state is conducting environmental impact assessment before carrying out any large-scale projects, but such assessment is rarely done. If you look at overall region, IGAD region climate, or let me say weather events like drought and floods, cause or most of the time exacerbate existing conflicts. What we found in this assessment is that such conflicts do impact on different regions in different ways. There are conflicts those are specific to within pastoral communities. There are other conflicts which also impacts on, let me say, between pastoral communities and farmers, specifically subsistence farmers in the region. And then within farmers, there are also other most of the time drought caused conflicts. If I just try to analyze a bit longer about a bit further the conflicts that are within the farmers during water scarcity, upstream farmers may block the water from reaching the downstream farmers, and then there may be a conflict there. During the abundance in water, they release much more than the capacity of the canals or even the pipes, and then such water destroys the downstream farmers, and then they start conflicts. If you took another example in the highland and lowland of Ethiopia, such climate-associated conflicts affected differently. If you look at the highlands, the most common factor is destroying livelihoods and causing unemployment to the youth. When young people becomes unemployed, they are easily exploited by armed groups. Most likely, it could be non-state actors. They create a cost for them, and they can easily be exploited. If you look at even Somalia now, the youngsters are very susceptible to be recruited by the terror groups Al-Shabaab, simply because they don't have livelihoods. And they feel beloved within the ranks of Al-Shabaab, and they create a cause for them. That's why they are even exploding themselves. That's why they are committing suicide bombings. What are we doing as IGAD then, or as ICPAC? What we do is we conduct impact-based forecasting. We hold what we call Greater Horn of Africa Climate Outlook Forum 3 times a year. The next forum will be conducted in Addis Ababa in the 4th week of May. We bring stakeholders together, mostly from the member states, different sectors of the member states, and other stakeholders, including the UN agencies and private sector. We share with them what will be the outlook of the next season and how such outlook will impact on the specific sectors. So member states will those forecasted to the subnational level. So in terms of climate security, we advise what will be the forecast pasture availability in hotspot areas. How these climate-induced mobilities or short-term mobilities may cause conflicts, communal conflicts in a given specific areas. Therefore, if you ask me what IGAD or other partners can do, the most important factor is capacity development. And I can divide this into two. One is at IGAD level capacity development, we need to improve our forecasting capabilities. And then the next stage at national level and subnational level, such forecast information, climate self-information should be utilized by the member states and local communities. So access to such information is very important. Dissemination of that information is also very crucial. How can we reach the last mile? How can we reach end users of the climate information? So those are what we are focusing on now. And finally, member states should harmonize their policies, particularly the border areas, cross-border areas. Most of the time, people living in those cross-border areas from same community, they speak same language, they pursue similar livelihoods. You may not sometimes even distinguish who is from there, from that country, who is from that country. They cross the borders easily. So those countries should have harmonized and at least conflict-sensitive policies. And then the international community should also support the member states to improve their policies and technical capacity, access to the satellite data, access to remote sensing capabilities. So those are the areas that I would like to see cooperation between IGAD member states and international communities. Over to you. I yield there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Fidar, also for highlighting the role of IGAD in harmonizing policies and including also in the discussions, as you said, the private sector. So thank you very much for that. Next on my list is Ambassador George Orina. So you're ambassador and the representative of Kenya to the AU. And as Ambassador Onanga highlighted, Kenya has been taking the lead role on climate and security, including by organizing and hosting the Africa Climate Summit in 2023. So my question to you is, how can African diplomacy, including through the AU, further strengthen the continent's representation and influence in global climate and security forums, such as those in Geneva and New York? Please, Ambassador.
Thank you. Let me begin by thanking my dear friend, the Ambassador of Switzerland, and the organizers of this event, the Geneva Peace Building Forum, Amani Africa, among others, for organizing this very important forum and for inviting me to share a few words on this important topic and also to respond to the question that the moderator has asked. Let me also say that my friend Solomon just walked in when I was going to take issue with the fact that he pushed me to attend, and then he wasn't there to listen to my 5 cents on the topic. But he did come in, so he takes the sting out of my criticism of him. Let me also confess that before we started this, I had a very candid discussion with my colleague, my senior brother, Parfait Onanga, and we agreed that in full respect of his seniority, he will speak, and my job will just to concur with him 100% and invite questions. But the moderator again had us and therefore decided to place many speakers between me and Parfait, so I didn't get a chance to say that. Allow me to say this, that coming towards the tail end of this panel, a lot that I wanted to say has been said. And let me actually say in earnest that I concur with what has been said. Also, let me say that these and such forums give us a platform where we can amplify our voices, especially the African voices, in shaping peace and security responses that are climate sensitive, locally informed, and globally relevant. The effects of climate change continue to exacerbate fragility, to fuel displacement, and to intensify resource-based conflicts, and to threaten the very foundations of peace and development, particularly so in this continent of ours. The inherently complex and multidimensional nature of climate change demands integrated and well-coordinated action from all levels, whether we're talking of at the national level, subnational level, and whether we are talking among nations at the regional level, at continental level, and at the global level. It's important, therefore, that our various hubs, whether it is the continental hub here in Addis or Geneva, as an important UN headquarters, that we coordinate our action, that we speak to each other and find what is the commonality of that which we can push in our efforts to see how do we resolve these complex issues that we have found ourselves, so that we stop being what I think, again, Dr. Solomon said, monsters. I don't want to be part of the monsters, I do believe. We must continue to galvanize the collective momentum to urgently confront the escalating effects of climate change, and at the same time, it's crucial to scale up and support solutions through which we can harness the vast potential natural resources that we have, especially for us in Africa, the indigenous knowledge systems and homegrown innovations to advance sustainable and climate resilient development across the continent. Let me hasten to say here that for a long time, the position has been who are the polluters, who are the most affected. And that narrative is increasingly changing, where we are saying it's not about who did what and who needs to do what. It's about what can we collectively do, because we are facing an existential threat. What can we collectively do? What is it that we can all bring to the table? So Africa is saying we have natural resources. abundant natural resources, we can make a positive contribution to how we resolve the existential threat that we are facing. But we need support in order for us to harness these resources for the good of everybody. This call to action is even more critical given the current geopolitical and geoeconomic shifts, which have significant implications for both development priorities and environmental conservation. Again, here I want to say, for those of us who've seen conflict situation, environment is the last thing that people in conflict are thinking. Environment is the last investment for nations that are spending significant resources in trying to build peace, in trying to consolidate nationhood, to think about. So it's very, very important that we have concerted efforts. Otherwise, we perish together. Africa has the potential to leverage its abundant natural resources to transform the challenges posed by climate change into opportunities for sustainable development, socio-economic stability, and lasting peace.
With Geneva.
That's a commercial break.
Yes, I hope so too. Are we connected? Yes, please.
Thank you, thank you. Africa has the potential to leverage its abundant natural resources to transform the challenges posed by climate change into opportunities for sustainable development, socio-economic stability, and lasting peace. Pathways to peace and security in the climate discourse could include robust support for adaptation actions that also strengthen peace and security, such as enhancing early warning systems, promoting sustainable land management, and supporting climate resilience. I'm sure all this has come through in the various statements that have been made by the members of this panel. We must leverage every available platform at the regional, continental, and global level to advocate for solutions and policy frameworks that ensure our climate actions extend beyond the emission reduction, to also prioritize building resilience in vulnerable regions and fostering sustainable peace and development. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, as we move forward, let us remain united and speak with one voice to drive transformational change and advance climate peace and security agenda with boldness, clarity, and a shared purpose. I do concur with the sentiment that climate should not become a peace sub-theme. In conclusion, I believe that today's dialogue will not only deepen mutual understanding between Geneva and Addis, but will lay the groundwork for long-term collaboration that transforms policy into impact on the ground. I thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Arena, and also for highlighting how the African continent can help the world, in fact, through a good management of natural resources, overcome some of the challenges that are threatening us all. Last but not least, speaking from Geneva, Mrs. Co Barrett, who is the Deputy Secretary General of the World Meteorological. It's very difficult for me as a French-speaking person to pronounce this, the WMO. In Geneva, please, the floor is yours, Mrs. Deputy Secretary General.
Thank you very much. That word is hard for me to say too, which is a little embarrassing since that's my organization. And I just wanted to say, on behalf of WMO, we're very honored to be speaking today in this important dialogue between these two important international centers, Geneva and Addis. I wanted to comment a little bit on how I see Geneva-based organizations, especially those that are providing scientific research or global assessments, climate assessments, early warning tools. and how we work with African institutions to strengthen climate-sensitive peace-building strategies, if I can. You know, it's very clear, having been here for a year now in my role as Deputy Secretary General, that, you know, there are many Geneva-based organizations, including WMO, but also UNEP and UNICEF, who bring global expertise in climate science, early warning systems, and policy coordination. But that expertise only has impact when it's co-developed with local institutions and tailored to real-world needs. And at WMO, we are guided by a simple truth. Science saves lives, but only when it reaches people in time and in a form they can act on. And nowhere is this more true than with the Early Warning for All initiative, which we co-lead with UN partners. And the goal of that initiative is bold and urgent, ensuring that everyone, everywhere, is protected by multi-hazard early warning systems by 2027. African countries are central to this effort, not only as beneficiaries, but as partners and leaders driving implementation. Today, WMO is active in 9 fragile or conflict-affected countries in Africa, including Somalia, Mozambique, and South Sudan. And in these contexts where, as other speakers have said, climate risks compound conflict and vulnerability, early warnings are not just about disaster response. They are really a vital tool for stability, adaptation, and peace building. At the WMO, our work, as you can imagine, is rooted in partnership with the National Meteorological and Hydrological Services. And some of the examples of our work kind of include in Somalia, we're supporting the newly established Weather Service to define national priorities for early warning for all. In Mozambique, technical collaboration with the South African Weather Service is strengthening flood and severe weather forecasting across these countries. But, you know, beyond early warning for all, WMO leads and contributes to several key initiatives that support resilience in fragile settings. The Climate Risk and Early Warning Systems Initiative, we call it CRUISE, which provides funding and technical support for early warning in vulnerable countries. We're involved in the Water at the Heart of Climate Action project, which is a €55 million partnership, funded by the Netherlands, which aims to accelerate and scale up water-related disaster risk reduction with a focus on floods, droughts, and impact-based forecasting. And we provide the State of the Climate in Africa report, developed in partnership with regional African institutions, which provides actionable climate data for decision-making in conflict-prone countries and regions. And we also support regional collaboration through WMO's Regional Climate Outlook Forums, particularly in the Sahel and Horn of Africa, where climate services help to inform humanitarian and peace-building operations. And we heard Dr. Fidar from ICPAC talk about this effort. So across all of these, you can see that WMO is contributing to climate security research and capacity building, including through the Climate Research for Development in Africa initiative and support to the African Center for Meteorological Applications for Development, ACMAD, and other regional climate centers. We really deeply believe that partnerships with universities and these groups and think tanks is really essential to building skills in climate-sensitive risk analysis. But we also know that no single organization can do this alone. And so to deliver on the promise of early warning for all, especially in fragile and conflict-affected settings, we rely on strong partnerships across the humanitarian, development, and climate communities. That's where we are really committed to make climate science accessible, actionable, and inclusive so that early warning systems can truly protect lives and livelihoods and contribute to a more stable and resilient future on the ground. Thanks.
Thank you very much for highlighting. I really appreciated this point that you made, that early warning and forecasting based on scientific research and collaboration can indeed improve collaboration on climate security issues between states, universities, and organizations, and sometimes indeed overcome political differences and challenges that you may encounter. We do have the time for Q&A session. We have about 10 to 15 minutes for Q&A. So it's my pleasure now to open the floor to you, and I see immediately a hand raised by Salomon, which I give you immediately the floor. Please, Salomon.
Thank you very much, Anissa, for your kindness. Indeed, I wouldn't have left Ambassador George after insisting to have you here on the hall. Your point about what one of the things that Africa brings to the table in order to contribute to the resolution or to the solution for the climate emergency. This has been and was one of the points that was made during the Nairobi summit as well. The question I have, earlier in the high-level panel, one point that was made, if I may quote you, Ambassador Petro, was the point that natural resources are becoming a site for geopolitical contestation, right? So how do you see the risk that these geopolitical contestations on these natural resources would actually have, and the implications of it for Africa, and the possibility of Africa leveraging these resources actually for, contributing towards the solution of this global crisis. Thank you very much again.
Thank you. I will take another question. Yes, please, sir. Please introduce yourself also.
My name is Jean-Paul Mugiraneza. I'm from Interpeace. I'm the Senior Director in charge of Program Development. There is one particular thinking, it's not a question that I want to put on the table. How do you link in meaningful way communities that are affected to the issue of early warning in data collection, in monitoring and evaluation of what we are doing? I still see the gap there. As Interpeace, as an organization that involves communities, I see that everyone sees why it is important, but it's difficult to do. Maybe because it's happening up there, where they are not. And I'm convinced that if we fill that gap, something meaningful will happen.
Sorry, that could be a question for Mrs. Barrett. Yes? Okay. Yes, one last question for this round, and then perhaps we'll have the time to do another round.
Thank you. Stephen Burke, United Nations Office to the African Union. Just also a question for the Deputy Secretary General of the WMO. I'm curious, just in the context of crews, but also in the context of early warning for all, if you are engaged with, or if linking to my colleague online, Tendai Kesanganetti, who's joining us from Kampala at the moment, if we could introduce you to the work of the African Union on multi-hazard early warning and situation room, alongside the work of the Continental Early Warning System at AU PAPS. Perhaps we could collaborate with crews to ensure that WMO is also working at the continental level. Thank you.
Thank you. You can go first.
Thank you. I wish I hadn't said anything about Dr. Solomon. Then I would have it easy. Thank you so much for that question. And the question about resources, natural resources, and the abundance of those resources, especially for a continent like Africa, I think it's a question that we have grappled with for a long time. And the correlation between conflict and the abundance of natural resources, to the extent that we're talking about the resources being a curse for Africa. But what can we do differently? We have the resources, and these resources are required. That's something that we need to work on and that we are working on. So one of the things is to get to a conversation where how do we leverage the abundant resources that are in Africa and that are needed elsewhere as an instrument for us to facilitate the action that is required, the scale of action and the scale of resources that are required for climate action. One of the things that we have said is Africa is ready to contribute not only in adaptation but also in mitigation. But what do we need? We need technology transfer, we need resources at a scale and within the time that it will facilitate that action. And the premium for Africa is the abundant resources. It doesn't augur well when we go to the carbon market that the pricing of the carbon market or the carbon trading is different for African countries and different for other countries. It does not help. If we could only just ensure that we have a trading framework that is fair to all. We are not asking for any favors, but a framework that is fair to all. So that if we are all trading in carbon credits, then it makes sense to an African and makes sense to an Asian, makes sense to somebody in Western or Eastern Europe, for as long as we are trading in the same commodity. But that is, the scales of international trade are tilted against those who so require those resources at a scale and level that they are able to participate meaningfully in our global initiatives. So that is one of the things. At the African Union, we have been speaking about how do we support our own member states to get value for the resources that they have. So when we're talking of beneficiation and we're talking about value addition, that's one of those are some of the initiatives that we are working on to ensure that can we have a framework, a continental framework that supports member states, especially in entering into negotiations on the cell, so to speak. I know cell has become a very negative terminology on the transfer of the resources that we have in Africa to where they will be most used for human development, because that's what resources should help us. How do we harness the resources and transfer them for the benefit of all humanity, but in a way that it benefits the community, it benefits the society, it benefits the countries that are the source of these resources. So that's the discussion that I think we all need to have. And all we are asking is to tilt the scales so that they do not favor anyone to the disfavor of any other country. What we are asking is what favors all the countries of this planet Earth. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So now we go to Mrs. Barrett. I don't know if she's still with us online.
I am. I'm here, and I very much appreciated the question, which was really, how do we bring this early warning from something up here to something on the ground? And I think that's a very astute question. I guess from a WMO perspective, we would say, that really effective response requires stronger collaboration at all of these levels, global, regional, all the way down to on the ground, to ensure that early warnings are timely, relevant, and actionable. So that really requires that the systems are designed in a way that they are kind of co-owned, co-produced, and really grounded in the regional realities. From our perspective, it kind of begins by strengthening the operational linkages between the kind of global data processing centers, in our case, with the regional centers, the specialized centers that deliver meteorological and climate information. And then really important is working with the regional institutions like ACMAD, ICPAC, and then, of course, engaging the national weather services, and this because they really are the boots on the ground providing early warning. So that's that's kind of the way that partnership helps to translate these global forecasts, the data, into locally relevant warnings, and incorporate both climate hazards and their social and security dimensions. And it's really important that collaboration extends beyond the climate community, because we need to strengthen coordination between actors like ourselves and humanitarian and peace-building actors, which allows our forecasts to kind of come alive and support early and anticipatory action, early crisis response. And this is particularly important in fragile settings where time is of the essence. We know that data sharing platforms that integrate climate, conflict, and socioeconomic information really do a much better job of enabling joint risk analysis and better prioritization of early action. So that's kind of a key approach that we would employ in answer to your question.
Excellent, thank you very much. We have the time for two or three, or unless you want to add something, please.
No, thank you so much. The question asked by my dear brother, Dr. Solomon, to George is indeed a very profound one, as much as it is also complex. Now, you didn't tell us, Madam Moderator, whether we were talking here under Chatham House rules, but maybe not. Maybe not. and therefore, we'll have to reserve some of our comments for another time. But suffice to say that this is a very complex issue. I have a motto that I'm trying to sell, but I think private sector people will resist it, and understandably so, that Africa should strive to ensure that resources are transformed where they are exploited. Because this is then you create an ecosystem that would indeed keep much added value to the raw material before they are gone. And this ecosystem will bring in investment in education, in technology, in infrastructure, all conditions that are absolutely vital for homegrown transformation and development. There will be no mystery, no secret about it. If there is no effort to break what sometimes when I dream of transforming Africa, what I call the overcoming the needle challenge. How many on the continent are able to transform from raw to finish? How many countries? This is it. We are in business. And even as efforts are now made to involve in the private sectors through this new initiative, when we look at $1.3 trillion and with a $300 billion per year starting this year, well, let's hope it works. But we've been there, and it looks like, and under the current climate, it might not be that easy. So let's hope more investment will be made in STEMs, so that some of the resources African countries will be able to transform them themselves. So that you produce, and I like Switzerland, as an example of those so-called, small countries, but so powerful because they found their niches, because they invested for a long time in STEMs, in science, education, and then they're mastering real fields, niches of, great value for the local economy. There is no secret about it. Let us not try to, invite concepts that are absolutely inappropriate when it comes to business. Business is about interest, and therefore it would be hard to look for any other. Of course, we should always, and that the UN, the SG has been championing, including on fair share, fair prices of goods, which is a conversation that is ongoing. The GA has just started a new conversation on international taxation. Good luck. It's going to be something. But the projections there indicate that if everything is done, if we lived in a fairer world, then countries will have the asset they need to invest in their absolutely burgeoning population and youth without begging, without asking for charity. But, the GA is now looking into this. Whether this, succeeds or not is still a big question mark. But let me put it this way. I hail from the disarmament world, where we used to be told that weapons don't fight wars. And I tended to agree with that. But the other side of the coin is that, whenever you have too many weapons proliferating, the likelihood for them to be used into conflict is huge. So therefore, work on the two sides. And if anything, we should all resist any kind of, in French we say fetishism. We don't want to fetishize if that English people will agree to this terminology. Climate change, it will not become the solution or the answer to all peace and security issues that Africa is confronted with. First and foremost, we have to look at governance issues. I think these issues will not change. The core of the work that needs to be done in conflict prevention, in conflict mediation, in promoting national dialogue and social contract in society so that people find ways of living together so that when there is an issue, including accelerated and multiplied by climate change, then because the country has already endowed itself as called for by the SG in its new agenda for peace with peace-building mechanism, homegrown peace-making mechanism, climate change will be part of that conversation. And therefore solutions will be found. So, including, of course, in partnership with all the rest of the world in addressing these issues. So, but having said this, it is also a reality that Africa did not invent climate change, and that it finds itself at the receiving end of climate change, climatic vagaries. And we just heard from the Deputy Secretary General of WMO with the SG, the two heads launched on the margins of Sharm el-Sheikh, in Egypt, the initiative, Early Warning for All, which was only requiring, let me say only, sorry, $3.1 billion to ensure that the whole world was covered. And so that as much as we enter into a world where climate events will be more and more, violent and causing havoc in countries that are absolutely ill-prepared, and most of them in Africa, when those tools are in place, and of course capacity has built in national government, then countries will be more prepared to adapt to this new reality, and also, when appropriate, to mitigate some of the consequences of climate change. So this is the conversation that I hope, and I look forward, and therefore partnership of like-minded countries and the investment that Switzerland, for example, and others are put into promoting the completion of the African common position are absolutely vital. and enabling the chairperson's, report on the nexus between climate, peace, and security. All of this will be extremely important to create, and that's why also, let me invite also the SG, the DSG, WMO, DSG. Yes, we need more science. Please bring science on the table, because the latest IPCC's report has just made it clear and loud and clear that Africa will be more and more exposed to the implication, the consequences of climate change. So there is no invention here. It's a reality, it's a fact. And when we know that climate change didn't come out of the blue, it's a result of global warming. At least that's what science tell us. So we need strong evidence-based science to tell us what it is, so that when countries will be arguing and asking for international solidarity, it's because at the end of the day, they have just been victims of a phenomenon that they produce very little into causing. So this is the conversation we need to have, and that, as George said it, we are in this together. And the chairperson this morning made a comment on the state of multilateralism, which is absolutely, absolutely what we need as a as a community of member states, as a community of people around this world. There will be no solutions on, major global, existential crisis like climate change without a solid, absolutely effective multilateral system. So that's why we are in this conversation, and I believe it's absolutely worth continuing.
I think, Ambassador, you have concluded so beautifully this panel that unless there is a very urgent question, I would like, okay, so because, I agree to give the floor to one more question, and then please, we will indeed close the discussion. Please, Madam.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for being gracious. I'll make it very quick. Thank you for the wonderful conversations. I am Tigist Tailu. I'm communications lead at IGAD's Conflict Early Warning and Response Mechanism, which of course works very closely with Mr. Fidar's office, IPAC. We actually are very strongly supporting them in the forecasting, doing analysis and the early warning part on the climate conflict link. And CWARN has a very long track record of working in climate-prone areas in the border lands of IGAD. So this conversation is music to my ears. And while we really work on building the capacity of climate risk assessment and integration into early warning systems, conflict early warning systems, I felt like there was a missing piece to the conversation, which is response. So we've been working in early warning systems for over 2 decades, and sharpening their ability to predict is an endless work, which is of course a very solid starting point, but always the response side of it gets lost in the way. And for us who are working at the regional level with a little bit more proximity to where the crisis is happening, we kind of see very clearly the capacity gap. So we can present to member states and partners very strong early warning reports, but without giving due consideration to their capacity to act. So either state-based institutions that are close to the ground or others. And I feel like that's a missing piece to the conversation we haven't quite addressed adequately. So I thought I would add this 1 cent. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very important addition to the conversation, the missing part on the capacity. I don't know if either of you would like to comment or add something on that point.
Well, I will not dare. I may disappoint my my dear sister. I mean, the primary responsibility will remain a member state's responsibility, again and again and again. And that's why, for some of us, climate change cannot be looked into or addressed away from core issues of sustainable development. It's a development issue. And those who are more endowed and prepared, yeah, will mitigate. Their conversation is on mitigation. We have to adapt. And that tells you already a long story about the capacities to face this absolutely existential threat that is not diminishing in intensity, on the contrary. And this is happening at a time when, global partnership is somehow deeply challenged, and countries will have to really focus on the nitty-gritty, on the basics, and let alone investing in capacity for addressing climate change. This is going to be a really serious issue. That's why all those global commitments, because we do acknowledge one thing, it is not, an issue that any single country can on its own, regardless of its size, might, and resources, address. So this is where, we need international solidarity and partnership. And that is something that I hear you. The frustration is there, is understood, but definitely there will be also a need to advance further on the whole integration agenda on the continent, because if countries continue to address those issues in isolation, look into their meager national resources that are really almost, compromised with so many other pressing demands, it will be more difficult. But again and again, as a UN, we stand for global partnership, we stand for multilateral solutions, and that's why my boss, as you know him, has been really championing the request for a stimulus package for the funding of the SDGs. He was very bold and ambitious. He asked for 500 billion a year. This is the kind of resources that are needed if we need to really move, the needle a little bit and try to get closer to the issues that we are discussing this evening. But we hear you, and thankfully with the Geneva dialogue, we will continue the conversation.
Thank you very much, and also for reminding us this very important concept that we tend to forget, which is the one of fraternity, solidarity, sorority. So with these very beautiful words and the concluding remarks, we will end today's discussions of Geneva Peace Week meets Addis Ababa, and join me in thanking our speakers that are here today and also online. I would also like to thank the team of the Geneva Peacebuilding Platform for today, also Amani Africa, the Swiss Department of Foreign Affairs, and also thanking the technical team who has been accompanying us this afternoon and have been working non-stop to support this discussion here and in Geneva. Thank you very much for the technical team. And I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. So we'll resume the discussion on IHL and peace, and then we'll have a discussion on youth and technology, ending the day with the peace talks, which will be a wonderful event taking place here at the Hyatt and also at the Fendika Club. So have a nice evening. Thank you again for joining us. Merci beaucoup, and see you tomorrow.
Thanks so much.